Salutations and welcome everyone to this episode of Perpetual Perspectives, powered by Vest Exchange. Vest is a novel perpetual futures exchange built on ZK Sync. This is Stoic. I'm back with another episode. It's been a bit of a hiatus because of the summer or how the markets are, and obviously people are out touching grass. So logistically speaking, it's been a bit of a bit of an issue, but we're gonna get these fired up again. And today I have the honor and pleasure of having with me Sting at Care Trades on Twitter, who is a liquidity and volatility junkie, an ex-prop trader turned full-time DGen, and he enjoys smacking bids and offers. I took that from his Twitter bio. I believe he's been trading for 7 years. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But without stalling too much, let's get right into it. Could you please introduce yourself, Sting?
Hey, Stoke. Yeah, great to meet you and I appreciate you having me on. My name is Sting. I've been trading full time for about the past 7 years, mostly on the prop and market making side, both on chain and on centralized exchanges. Yeah, I've traded pretty much almost everything out there aside from options. But yeah, happy to kind of chat today and get into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've been awaiting this conversation for a long time. We've been going back and forth for months now, but I'm really glad to have you on now and to have this conversation with you. So usually I ask everyone what their, this might be a bit of a silly question, but I always get fascinating answers. And I've seen you've tweeted about this as well, but the story behind your account name on Twitter and how you decided to choose that name.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I think when I was starting out, like a lot of my friends had like really cool gamer tags and things like that, and I was always jealous. I was like, oh, like why can't I be a creative and come up with a cool name? And for the longest time, I just like couldn't come up with anything unique. And then when I was in college, I actually had an old Corvette, like an old Stingray Corvette, and this was like well before I got into trading. This was like every guy in my family is mechanic, so we just kind of would shoot the shit and we sit in the garage and just work on stuff. And so I built this car from scratch basically, and we had the frame, we dropped like a high performance engine into it, and I poured every dollar I had into it at the time. At some point in college, I got into trading pretty heavily, and I just didn't have the time or money to keep both. And so by the time I was graduating college, I got this opportunity to go trade at a prop firm out in Australia, and I basically couldn't afford to keep the car. So I sold the car, and that was my rent money in Sydney. That's where the name kind of came from. It started out with Stingray on the trading floor, but all the Australians just kind of have a knack for shortening names, and so it just kind of got shortened to Sting, and yeah, it just kind of stuck. More people call me Sting now in my real life than my real name. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's such an awesome story, and I saw you tweet about it. I'm like, this is sick, because I've always been an American muscle car person as well, and I've sunk a lot of money into an old muscle car that I had. So yeah, definitely relatable there. But you talked about going all the way to Australia. What I wanted to get into was your background before crypto and trading, and how you even got introduced to trading or crypto for that matter.
Yeah, definitely. So my background is purely from like small cap, low cap trading and equities actually. So before even crypto, trading on the Nasdaq, on the NYSE, and a lot of low time for order flow scalping. So a lot of my career I've gone full circle where I started with order flow, went to price action, was trading FX for a bit, and then kind of came back to order flow when I was trading at the prop firm. But basically what we were doing is a mixture of fundamental kind of research and technical analysis. So we basically look at filings, we look at dilution, try to figure out when a lot of these unlocks would hit, and then try to figure out when these things would basically tank 50 to 60% because the insiders were diluting the stock and the overall supply. And then you pair that with the order flow, and you could basically see this happening on the tape in real time, and you could just kind of smack it and tighten your entries. And so I was doing that for about a year, and that's where I was really like cutting my teeth. So I basically started with nothing, like a couple, like maybe $10,000 account, and just tried to grow it from there. And so after a year, I would say like halfway through, it started becoming profitable. And a lot of the guys I was trading with were starting to talk about, like crypto. And they were, talking about like putting their daughter's college fund into Litecoin and just like random shit like that. And I was like, this is whatever. Like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is kind of bullshit. But then I saw like how much Bitcoin was actually moving, and I was like, okay, like even if I don't think that this is going to be around, or if I think that this is going to be a bubble, I could probably make a few bucks, here and there. So I was smart enough to know that it was a bubble, but I wasn't smart enough to know how to actually trade it. And so yeah, I got kind of caught on the way down from 20K. I started buying way too early, probably around like 12 to 16K. It just got completely blown out. But like from there, I was like, okay, this actually makes a lot more sense. There's not as much fees. The data is a lot more readily available than in stocks. Because my monthly outlay when I was trading stocks was like, I want to say $500 to $600 a month, on a $10,000 account. So that's quite a big dent. So yeah, that was kind of like my introduction to crypto and how I got hooked.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like, to take a step back, do you remember how you even got into trading, like your first trade, or who introduced you to it, or how you even got into that space?
Yeah. So I got into trading when I was in college. My dad actually gave me, I think maybe $1,000 to just trade. And he's like, you should look into stocks. You should kind of learn how to buy stocks. And from there, I like got into day trading. I was like, I can make a couple bucks here and there and not have to work during college. So I basically worked for the summers at the family auto shop, and then I would just kind of trade during the year, and that would kind of pay for my bills, pay for enough for me to go out. Um, yeah, so I kind of got lucky to make a little bit of money in the beginning before I lost it all. But yeah, that's how I got into it.
Yeah, such as that story is pretty typical, right? For like, making some money and then
Yeah,
losing it, and it's like the ups and downs of trading. Um,
for sure.
where did you end up getting your information from, like, initially? Because that's a struggle. Like, a lot of people have this struggle now because they'll go to crypto Twitter, they'll try to find information. Like, there's like YouTube and short form videos, and there's a lot of garbage out there now. But I'm just curious to know, what did it look like for you back then, and how did you go about getting information and eventually finding people that are like minded and trading with them or exchanging information for that matter?
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the things that was most instrumental in my growth, if I'm honest. And we can talk about this a bit more later, but I actually think that's the alpha of being on the trading floor at a prop firm. It's not the tools that they give you, it's being around the same type of people. But yeah, early on in my career, I actually started off with a famous kind of like mentor out there, Tim Sykes. He's kind of like a guru, like kind of fake mentor kind of thing that a lot of people have heard of. Um, and he would basically like make money on these like pump and dump calls where he was like selling a signal service and blah blah blah. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I kind of baptism by fire got into that, and I was like, okay, like these guys aren't really answering my questions, but I could tell there was a little bit more to it. And so yeah, that's how I got into it. I found some real traders in that group, actually, funny enough, and then was able to find some other like proper mentors from there. I found a few guys on Twitter that I befriended and just kind of would not stop bugging them, basically, just like digging through their Twitter feeds, just finding whatever sources of alpha I can. I still have a bookmark on my phone, or like a folder on my phone with like 500 to 1,000 tweets of just like
Yeah.
whoever I could find, just like anything that sounded remotely like this made sense, I would just save it. Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, that's how I kind of got started. I was like, okay, maybe I need to start sharing my ideas out there. And, it started with everything from like Ichimoku Cloud and like just basic trend lines and stuff to like more of the order flow stuff that I started talking about. And I don't actually remember when this happened, but I was lucky enough to find the PDF guys, if you've heard of that group, Pendia de Flujo, um, which was like a group of, I want to say, 15 to 20 of us back in the day. A lot of guys like Glimmery Coin, Cuban Tobacco, Keck, I think Cred was in there, Tommy, Bit Dealer, just a lot of like really good quality guys from 2018. XO was in there as well. Just like a lot of very different perspectives. And I think that was probably the most instrumental kind of part of my journey where, just being in a group where we were there every single day, you had a lot of very different traders who were just willing to kind of show what they were doing. And we would all just kind of pick bits and pieces and just kind of rib off of each other. And so that was really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. And do you think that environment is still in place? Like, is that because things have changed a lot now, and to find that kind of a group is pretty rare. Do you think it's still possible to find that kind of a group, or if you really dig around and go down like various rabbit holes and talk to people online, do you think it's still possible to get that same quality of you know people around you?
Yeah, I think it's really hard, right? I think it was easier back in the day when a lot of people were kind of trading actively and a lot of people were looking at the same things. But now you'd see that like a lot of the things are fragmented across, just people trading different things, people looking at different things, people who talk in different time zones, all that kind of stuff. Versus before when you were literally only looking at BitMEX and everyone was trading the same volatility hours and like everything was concentrated around one market, it was a lot
Right.
easier.
Right.
But I think you can still find that, right? Like, that's not to say that that doesn't happen today. Like, a lot of times you'll see Telegram groups around like shitcoins popping up, and it's the same kind of feeling, right? You just need to find people who are kind of specialists in what they do and are motivated to kind of do that. And I think the best size is usually between like 5 to 20 people. Anything outside of that is just like gets to be a little noisy.
Yeah, and just to segue a little bit, and this is also alluding to what you spoke about earlier. How's your trading evolved since your first trade, and what's that process look like for you from a mindset perspective, so psychology wise, and also from a technical perspective? Because I find like people jump from system to system because there's so, like you said, that people, there's a variety of different ways of going about trading. Some people can trade off of a naked chart, and others, will use volume or market profile or order flow. So there's, multiple ways to skin a cat. But what did that look like for you? How did you go about developing your strategy and your system based on your individual mindset and psychology?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first like probably 3 to 4, maybe 3 years of my career was really jumping from system to system. And every year, 6 months to a year, I would kind of enter a new market, figure out a system. It would take me about 6 to 12 months to become profitable in that system. And then I was like, okay, well, this is cool, but this isn't, the next shiny object. Let's hop to the next thing. And so I basically went from, order flow to price action to, just name your flavor, and did all of that within the span of 3 or 4 years. I got pretty good at a few different ones, but I think what it really taught me was that like there is no golden system, but as a person, I was able to find the 2 or 3 things out of each one of those systems that really gelled for me, and then made my own system out of that. So my current system is a mixture of market profile, order flow, and price action, along with a lot of other stuff like seasonalities and like open interest and like a lot of these other little tidbits that I've kind of experienced along the way. But I think the ultimate kind of overarching theme is more so the process of how to think about entering a market, becoming profitable, journaling, reviewing your own trades, and figuring out what works for your own system. Because once you figure out that, it doesn't really matter the system. You can kind of you can take on any system if you have that process, and ultimately become profitable, or figure out if your personality does or doesn't gel with it. And that works both in discretionary and systematic trading. And so I've done both discretionary kind of trading on the prop desk as well as algorithmic market making. And so I think the two similarities there are really the process oriented kind of approach there rather than actual systemized strategies.
Yeah, you touched on a bunch of great points, and I'll come back to the discretionary and the algorithmic trading. But I wanted to talk to you about was you tweeted something about what edge really means, and you reference something about parsing out nuanced participant behavior when it comes to various exchanges. And I get this question all the time, and I figured like we could touch upon this at a high level.
Mhm.
What does that process look like, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that Glimmery Coin actually taught me. So he was the top P&L trader on the desk like 2 or 3 years in a row when I was there. And basically, what he taught me is that a lot of people will come to a market and they'll try to see the market in setups or patterns and say like, okay, this is the pattern I look for. I look for a swing failure pattern. I look for this SR
Right.
flip and it bounces here. But what people aren't really realizing is it's really just context and environment regimes that are shifting. And it's like if you understand what the market is telling you, you can trade anything, right? Like if the market is going completely sideways, then you should be doing mean reversion. If the market is trending, you should be kind of playing momentum. And that's easier to say than it is to kind of see in action. But that doesn't mean that like every time the market drops, you should be looking for a mean reversion play. Like you need to understand the nuance in that. And I think the bigger part of that is understanding why this is happening. So like if the market has just dropped, 20% and now it's going sideways, well, it's because most people are blown out, liquidity is blown out, market makers aren't stepping in. And if you look at the different exchanges, they're going to have different spreads because of how their fee structures are or what market makers got blown out. And so
Right.
it's like you have to look at it and peel the onion back one layer at a time. And it's like you can say, okay, there was a sweep of this low, and I'm going to put my stop loss here, and I'm going to put my entry here, and this is my target. But if you don't really understand the nuance of why this is happening, why the traders are trapped, why the market makers are stepping back, you're probably going to have a pretty low strike rate, or you're not really going to understand what's really happening. If you actually understand the market at the level of nuance of like, okay, this exchange is moving because the structure is this, because the fee structure is XYZ, or because the internal engine liquidates in this way, you can create a lot more repeatable edge. And that's actual alpha.
Yeah, 100%. And to peel back the layer a little bit, how should one go about doing that? Is it just a lot of screen time and observations and journaling? What would you suggest for someone listening in if they want to start going down that path?
Yeah, I think it's really thinking outside the box.
Right.
Like you can stare at a chart 20 hours a day, and this is not the stuff that's going to hit you in the face unless you're really looking for it. So I think a lot of it is like game theory on like why things are happening, and looking
Right.
at reading through the docs. Like why does an exchange function the way it does? Understanding, okay, when this person gets liquidated, why does the exchange do what it does? Who is the person liquidating the other person? When funding rate happens, right? Like who is the person who's collecting the funding? Who is the person that's paying the funding? Understanding the actual like microstructure and market dynamics rather than just like, okay, funding hit, it goes up 5% every time funding hits. Why does that happen? Um, and so I think like even on the prop desk, like a lot of guys don't look at this kind of stuff. They just kind of take it for granted. And those are the kind of guys when the market changes, from 2017 to 2019, from 2019 to 21, and from 21 to now, because every 2 years you get a major regime shift. Those are the kind of guys that don't last more than that. And the guys who are able to think outside the box and understand why these things happen are the ones who are able to kill it in any regime, no matter what.
Yeah, that's so important. And I wanted to ask you what your trading edge was, which you basically kind of succinctly described already. But if there's something you want to add on to that, because you've been at it for a while, what do you think your trading edge is currently?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like on the discretionary side, I don't try to do a lot of things that are new. I kind of have my system and I know what I like. And so it's a mixture of like process of how I enter a trade, how I manage my risk, and how I manage my portfolio, and then also how I
Right.
discover assets and kind of the narratives built around that. So I've kind of been able to identify, okay, like here are sectors that are poised to kind of pop for whatever reason, and then pairing that with my normal kind of discretionary systems. So that's like my normal style on that side. And then I think a lot on the algorithmic side is a lot of stuff I work on now, is just really finding the edge that we were talking about is, where are the inefficiencies happening, whether it be in NFTs, whether it be on on-chain Solana alts, just wherever the fat really is adapting kind of systems to do that.
Right. And this actually ties in with the statement that you we were talking about earlier, like being discretionary or being mechanical. And there's a statement or a tweet that I read a while back, and I forget who tweeted this, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm too discretionary for my quant friends, but I'm too mechanical for my discretionary trading friends." Where do you think that balance is? Like, how mechanical? Like, if you're a discretionary trader, how mechanical does one need to be, or is it about mindset and how you operate individually? Like, how you know what I'm saying? Like, what do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I honestly think it's a personal thing, but for me, that really hits home because I was the kid who was like on the desk and I was journaling every trade. So I would take 300, 400 trades a day and I would journal every single one. And Glenn would come up behind me and he goes, dude, every time you're journaling, you're taking your eyes off the screen. Like you're missing 30 to 60 seconds of what's happening
Hmm.
after your trade every
Right.
time you do that. And so I stopped journaling and my discipline just went completely out the window. Right. And so for me, I was like, fuck, like if I don't do this,
Yeah.
I'm just like I devolve into like this just like amateur kind of like I over risk, I over trade. I'm not, you know what I'm doing? Like I'm just not in my right element. And so like I think it's really a personal preference because there was guys on the desk who would do 2,000, 3,000 trades a day and they wouldn't write a single thing down. And they'd come back the next day and they'd do it again. Right. And that just wasn't me. And so I think that there's like an element of, you're just your personality and who you are as a trader. And then same thing, like I would have a checklist on like as soon as I would sit down on the desk. What are my clip sizes? Make sure all my risk is there. Make sure my charts are set up properly. Right. And there's
Right.
guys who would fucking roll out of the bed from lunch and come and start clipping. And so I think it's really just who you are. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I would say for myself, like I was always very systemized and I always trade better when I do actually have a system. And this is something I'm sure XOA and you talked about with the whole trading manual. I think documenting my process and understanding this is what I'm good at and this is how I do things literally every single step of the way. So when I'm going through a drawdown, I can look back at that and be like, okay, yeah, this is actually how I made money. Remind myself like, this is actually what I do.
Yeah, I think that's so important to actually understand what works best for you because there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there, especially now. There's a lot of stuff that's thrown out. And I've seen people kind of struggling with, hey, like this isn't working for me though. Like I'm trying to do this and it's not working for me. And like you said, I think it's very individual in nature to figure out what works best for you and kind of sticking to that.
Definitely,
Um,
100%.
to pivot a little bit, there's this entire conversation around either being a specialist and understanding all the nuances when it comes to the asset you're trading versus trading numerous tickers at the same time in a certain environment when it's up only, right? Um,
Yeah.
how do you filter information and find setups, and what do you think about that? Again, it is very individual. It goes back to the same conversation, but I just like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a very market specific thing. So when I'm day trading, I'm usually trading one market, like a futures market. So like a Bitcoin, ETH, S&P, ES. Um, if you're trading like, CFDs versus futures kind of thing. But it's really focusing in on one market, understanding the order flow, because I'm very much a field trader where I sit there, I'll stare at the ladder, and then
Hmm.
after an hour or so, like I'll understand the rhythm of the market. And so I
Right.
want to keep that going. And if I don't do that for 2, 3 days, then I lose touch until I do that again and I start getting into sync. And so for me, when I'm day trading, scalping, anything low time frame, definitely only 1 to 2 markets max. When I was on the desk, maybe you trade alts, so we trade like 5 at a time next to each other. But I think, yeah, when I'm usually scalping, probably 1 to 2 pairs max. When you're trading more swing, momentum, higher time frame stuff, definitely I'm looking for setups over individual markets, or narratives. And so that would involve, scanning through 50 to 100 different pairs. And that's the same thing over stocks, Forex, or altcoins. And so I think it's really just like a type of style and like the markets.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because I'll listen to the tape. I'll have Agar on, and with all the sounds and stuff. And at this one time, one of
Mhm.
my friends was visiting me. He's like, "What the fuck is that?" And I'm like, "I'm listening to the market." It's like you're listening to the cadence. And he's like, "Man, that's autistic as fuck." I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's sometimes you you have to take it there."
Yeah,
Um,
I have a story for you. So basically, when I moved to Sydney, COVID had just hit, and my girlfriend and I, my girlfriend at the time, um, we had a studio apartment, and so I basically had my desk there in the front of the apartment. We had the bed was probably like 10 feet away, and when COVID hit, basically had to bring all my stuff, and we were stuck in this small ass apartment. And so I would leave Agar on at night, so I knew when I had to jump in bed, and she literally was getting ready to kill me by the end of that because every single night would be like
Holy shit, man!
yeah.
Kudos to her for putting up with that.
Seriously, yeah. We're
Holy
we're
shit!
married now, but yeah, if not,
That's
I don't know
wild.
how that
That's
breakup would
wild.
have turned out.
That's how you knew she was the one. She's listening to like fucking
Exactly,
agony.
exactly.
Oh man. Um, yeah, I wanted to touch on this a little bit too because you went to a prop firm. So I'm sure you have plenty of stories, especially because we were talking offline before this, and you were telling me how, as soon as you started at the firm is when COVID went down. So how did
Mhm.
that look like on the floor? Like what was the environment like? And if there's any interesting stories that you'd like to share, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty wild time. I think lucky for us, we were all I can't remember if we were on demo accounts or we had just gone live, and so we all had like very small accounts. And so no one in my cohort got like badly blown out during the actual crash itself. But there was a lot of like really experienced traders on the floor who like we had just come in the first time. It was like our first or second week, and like we were seeing these guys. Like some guys were making tons of money, some guys were just like losing their fucking shirt. And it was just a wild experience. And it was like honestly like unlike anything I've ever been around before in the sense of, you have 100 people and not all 100 of them in the office. Maybe you have like 30 desks or 40 desks actually kind of taken up, but like screaming and yelling and banging the floor. And like, even when you talk to like equities traders nowadays, it's like very quiet. They're all kind of calling. It's like, I've never heard of anyone kind of talk about that environment. But it felt like, the old days of what you hear, like the stories of stock trading. It was a very like chaotic, vibrant, like some people were sleeping in the corners during all of this, like on mattresses. Like, yeah, it was pretty crazy. And I remember distinctly going out that night for dinner, for like an orientation thing. And we all went to the pub after. And I sit down next to one of the guys, one of the really big traders at the time, and he pulls out his phone. He just logs on to BitMEX, and he just starts longing it, and it drops from like I don't even remember where it was at. I want to say it was at like 30K dropped to like 18K, and the numbers might be off. But it was a pretty drastic drop, and he just starts buying it, and he fucking gets liquidated just right there on his phone in the matter of
Holy
2 minutes of us drinking a beer. I was like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I just lost 3 BTC." I was like, "What the fuck?" Like I had no
Holy
idea what I
shit.
was walking into at that point. And so yeah, that was I think like the crazy moment of just like the realization of like, okay, you're walking into this firm, and this is kind of what you're going to be around, and are you going to make it in this environment? And I think like the craziest actual like moment of that time was, the next day when we are all sitting there and you could actually see, zero on the ladder on BitMEX because there was only like X amount of dollars between, $1,000 or $2,000 and zero on Bitcoin.
Right.
And so just seeing that whole circuit breaker happening, and just like there was a handful of traders who got stuck in that because we were some of the biggest traders on BitMEX at the time. And so like seeing these guys like actually freak out and run into the manager's office and be like, what the fuck is happening? Like my position is gone. It's like this was all the first week of us being there, you know? And so it was just kind of like a crazy like wake up call of like, damn, these things can really happen. You had traders who had been there for years blowing out in a single day, and basically losing their careers and packing up. And yeah, so it was a pretty wild experience.
Yeah, that's pretty wild, man. And it sounds like, you're probably drinking out of a fire hose, but I feel like those environments are probably best for learning too. So you probably learned a lot during, just that initial time that you were there. Um, what did you take away from your experience at the prop firm?
Yeah, 100%. I think the biggest thing for me, and they did have proprietary tools and stuff as well, is that like the biggest thing about being at a prop firm is not the fact that you have, some software or some strategy that makes you a lot of money. It's really being around other people that are doing the exact same thing and people who have that kind of skill set or that knack or that drive, even if it's a little bit different. So I think like one of the coolest things was we were all trying to figure out how to make money. Like none of us really knew.
Right,
And
right,
so as soon as someone would figure it out, it wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna like hide this from everyone else. It was like, hey guys, come here. Let me show you what I'm doing. And so they would show them, and then somebody else would find something, and we all kind of just like talk about it openly and bounce ideas back and forth. And yeah, there were times where we were trading against the guy sitting right across the floor from us. So you did have to think about that a little bit, but that was when we all got a little bit bigger, and it did actually matter when we were moving markets and that kind of thing. But in the
right,
beginning, it was such a collaborative effort. But like let's just try to figure this out. Like none of our $100 or $1,000 accounts is really going to make a difference on each other. Let's just try to figure out how to make money. And so it was like, okay, you had 30 guys who weren't getting paid, who were literally starving, who were eating McDonald's every night, right? Trying to figure this thing out. And there was just like something about that drive.
right, right. Absolutely. And along the same lines, we're talking about struggles and obstacles. What do you think you struggle with the most when trading? And is there anything that you still struggle with? And how do you go about handling that now versus how you did before?
Yeah, I think this is already like really cliche, but my biggest thing is probably discipline. Um,
Mhm.
in terms of like process and sizing. And so it's like I have to do a lot of things in order to make sure that I follow my process. Because like when I don't follow, my specific rules for why I should be trading something or going too big on a certain setup versus another, then I just like my EV just kind of goes out all out the window. So I think that's like outside of like big blowups or kind of like being caught in certain events itself. Like that's the overarching theme that kind of underlines every single one of those events in my career.
Right. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, what do you think are your strengths and what do you manage to do really well?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of the balance where it comes to like I think as it is also one of my weaknesses is discipline and like oversizing and that kind of thing. That is also one of my strengths is being able to hit something really fucking hard when I believe in it.
Right. Right.
And like I won't do this now, but there were times where I would put 30, 40, 50, 60% of my account on a trade. And I'm not talking like a 100x leverage trade, right? Like
Yeah,
or
right.
like big ass narrative, kind of spreading out my risk, taking on different exposures. But there are times when I did that, and I've gotten burned and they've played out. But I think that's something that a lot of traders you'd have really really good analysts, but they couldn't execute when it mattered. They couldn't size up when it really mattered. And I think I've been able to do that pretty well. I think something else has been being able to adapt. I think that's been one of my biggest things is understanding different trading styles and taking my process through that and figuring out how to actually conquer different markets and trading styles with that process. So I think my strengths and weaknesses go pretty hand in hand in terms of like when I don't follow my process or when I don't do these things, it's very apparent that I don't can't make money or I can't kind of find my way out of it.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. I actually was talking to Huss about this as well, and he was talking to me about how he sizes up considerably. He looks for home runs basically, and
Mhm.
that's all dependent upon conviction. How do you think one goes about developing conviction? Is it like for you? Is it just gathering data and looking for certain nuances, or like how do you go about developing conviction in a trade?
Yeah, I think my conviction now really comes from just like gut feel and screen time. A lot of
Right.
like, okay, you've just seen these things happen enough times over and over again to where you know when to put on size. Um, and I think now I've just tried to shy away from, taking those B and C setups just altogether. It's like, why am I wasting the time and the mental capacity? And don't get me wrong, I still get caught. And this is where sometimes I get caught out now because I'm only trying to take A setups that I size into. If I pick the wrong setup, then I'm sizing into a bad setup. But why am I wasting that mental capacity and that capital on a setup that's only going to net me, X amount when all of my real gains for the year comes from these A setups that I only have to take once a month or whatever it is. Whether that's an NFT or whether that's an altcoin or whether that's whatever it is. And so I think, yeah, separating that and understanding, okay, I've seen this enough times. This is either a big ass sector that's going to blow up, or this
Right.
is either an individual trade that's going to blow up. And so, yeah, I have a few examples I can talk through of that as well. But yeah, I think that's looked very different at multiple times in my career.
Yeah, this conversation ties in really well with what I want to talk to you about in terms of risk management, which you're touching upon. Um, how's that evolved for you over time, and how did you deal with significant loss along the way? Because yeah, God knows as a trader, you have to go through trial by fire, and you need like an ungodly amount of grit to get through that. So how did
Yeah.
you deal with that, and what motivated you to push through that?
Yeah. I think I've definitely blown up like quite a few times, right? Like there's a
Right.
lot of guys out there who'll say, oh, like I've never done this, or like
Yeah, absolutely.
I've
Right.
blown out
Right.
a
Yeah.
handful of times and I'm not afraid to admit it. And I think those have been some of my biggest learning experiences. And I think how that's changed is just not putting myself in a position to ever blow out completely now. Because I think that's one thing that like I just realized you can never put your chips all in one basket, and you can never be in a position where an exchange goes down or a trade doesn't work out and you're just going to go completely under, because like trading is a game of survivorship, honestly. And so I think that was the biggest like mentality change from then to now. But like how I dealt with it was, in the beginning it was really hard. Like I blew out like 5 6 times, like, and had like complete mental breakdowns when the dollar amounts got to like, basically more than my net worth.
Right.
And yeah, it was honestly tough. Like it was some of the hardest times in my life.
Yeah, I can imagine. And a lot of people don't admit this, but I mean, it's a normal part of trading. Like this is the dark side of trading. And through you, I wanted to also send like this public service announcement in terms of how difficult trading really is and how many people are actually profitable trading full time.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that? Because people make it seem, oh, just use some moving averages and fucking like, I've seen a lot of garbage being thrown around and make it seem like it's an easy gig. But I like to send out that public service announcement through you in terms of how difficult it really is.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And I would say, like, in the 7 years, I've seen a lot of people come and go. And this
Right.
is an anecdote, but on the trading floor when I started, there was 15 of us in my cohort. After a year, when I left, there was 5 of us left. So basically, 10 people left without making money because we weren't getting paid a salary. So if you were trading and you were making money, then you got paid. Um, And so after a year, there was 10 people that had left and not a single one had left while making money. I left after a year for visa reasons and I was making a little bit of money at the time. I wasn't like massively profitable, but I was the only
Right.
one that left while making money. And so that means 4 out of 15 actually lasted more than a year and were making enough money to consider it income. Right. And that's a
Wow.
professional trading floor.
Right. Right.
And those numbers weren't unique to my cohort. If you talk to any traders before us, those were pretty similar numbers.
Yeah. So I just wanted to send that message out because a lot of people have this misconception of how easy it is to trade. I think it's important to understand how much effort, grit, and conviction is necessary to continue doing it for a long period of time and to be profitable, right?
Definitely.
Um, and there's a book that I don't really suggest too many books. There's really a handful of books that I feel were conducive to my trading journey. But one of them that I really like is called "Best Loser Wins" by Tom Hoogard. I don't know if you've come
Oh,
across
I
that
haven't.
book. You
Let's check it
haven't?
out.
Okay. So, but yeah, it talks about how important it is to be able to accept losses and not having your ego tied to the market. Because as you mentioned, you blown up accounts and suffered quite a bit, right? But it's also about what happened after that. I- Suffering is the best teacher, pain is the best teacher. But if that's
Mhm.
only if you allow it to be, right? You need to be able to take away those lessons, not repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And you've been at this for a while. So what I wanted to ask you was, what qualities you think are key for a trader to be successful?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, the cliche ones again. I think it's like discipline, adaptability, um, being able to think outside the box. I think those are a lot of the themes that you'll kind of hear in a lot of the things that I talk about, just because I've seen a lot of guys who are good for a cycle or good for a year or two, but then just fail to kind of adapt and kind of make this into a career, or just the longevity of keeping the money longer term. And so I think
Right.
that's just like a very common thing I've seen just throughout CT and just even with professional traders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the issue with crypto is the barrier to entry is so low, and we saw this in the last cycle as well, right? When there's a lot of people that ran up accounts with considerable amounts of money on leverage,
Mhm.
but it bit them in the ass on the way down. Like the same degeneracy that they were, the same mindset of degeneracy that they were using to run up the money was what bit them in the ass on the way down as well. Not
Totally.
having a process and all those things.
Totally. Yeah, and every single one of my rules, I would say I can can attribute to some kind of personal pain, or something that I didn't do well. So it's not like I'm a perfect trader either. And I had to go through some of these lessons multiple times. Like, and I think that was kind of the evolution of my career too. Is like a lot of the reason that a lot of these things were so painful is I went from having to learn these things in day trading and scalping. Like, okay, what is actually getting caught in a liquidation cascade or getting blown out on leverage to like how do you actually manage a portfolio? Like, how do you actually hedge risk when you're
Right.
running a decent sized book and you're trading spot over weeks to months, not minutes to hours. And so like I've had to go through those lessons on both sides because I'm one of those people that has to learn by actually feeling it. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you sharing that, and I hope it's helpful for the people that are listening in. Let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk to you about narratives, and I don't know if you really delve in macro or what's your thought process, but we'll talk about that a little bit. In terms of your short-term views, how do you look at the market currently and where it's headed, and if you have any thoughts on longer term in terms of, let's say, months out, like what are you seeing in the market currently?
Yeah, I think macro wise, it's a little interesting right now. You're seeing a lot of dislocation between like trads and crypto and just like what's happening in the trad market.
Right.
Um, you see like bond yields kind of going all over the place and the dollar's kind of coming off, you know, S&P's kind of nuking and then pushes highs. Like it seems like almost
Mm.
every other week.
Right.
And then you have gold doing whatever it wants as well. So it's like, I think there is definitely something dislocating in trad markets. I'm not too sure what, because I don't pay attention to that stuff too closely. But I think
Right.
like whatever is brewing there is going to have a downstream effect into crypto. Um, I I kind of still think that high time frame Bitcoin is like consolidating at a breakout level and has just been kind of compressing here, and that we will see a pretty big move to the upside when all this resolves. But that being said, if like all the trad stuff comes off and I'm completely wrong about that and the dislocations to the downside, then like I expect Bitcoin to follow because I think either way this range is going to be a pretty big break. So yeah, leaning upside, but I think if I'm wrong on the whole macro picture, then could probably just blow out this range and head back lower. But yeah, I'd like to assume price discovery.
Yeah, and along the same lines, talking about price and narratives, there's this discussion on, okay, well, what's the next narrative for Bitcoin to go higher? We've had the ETFs, we got the ETH ETF, which is apparently a nothing burger, at least for now, right? We saw how ETH has been doing this entire cycle.
Yeah.
What's your thought process on that in terms of narrative? Like, what's the next narrative, or price is a narrative? Like, price creates narrative. What's your general view on that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like narratives high time, like high level and stuff, but I also think that like a lot of these narratives were overblown in the sense that like an ETF isn't going to be a day one narrative. It's going to see the effects over 6 to 12 to 18 months, even longer
Right.
timeframes when you have actual institutional adoption. And so that's why I'm kind of like bullish on crypto, like even higher time frame than just this cycle, just because we're talking about, like we're actually seeing institutional adoption as, quote unquote, where you're seeing, PayPal come in and actually offer Rails for PayPal USD. You're seeing, institutions actually holding Bitcoin. You're seeing corporations holding, all of that kind of stuff. And so I think that like that is ultimately the higher time frame narrative or way more macro narrative for Bitcoin is that this is
Right.
actually a legitimized asset class now. I think that
Right.
there's a lot of smaller stuff happening in between where you're talking about like Bitcoin L2s, other VMs coming up on top of Bitcoin. You're seeing fungibles pop up on top of Bitcoin. You're seeing like other smart contracts pop up on top of Bitcoin. I think there's all of that kind of stuff happening as well. And same thing happening on Solana and Ethereum and all of that, right? You have Solana virtual machines. You have like all these layer twos kind of popping up. And so I think there's like the different kind of levels to the narrative. But I think that, yeah, high time frame or like bigger picture, I think Bitcoin adoption is here to stay, in my opinion. And so that's where you're going to see the real narrative flows from like ETFs and institutions. And like this cycle is probably more like the what's actually happening now, and more tied to macro, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. To dig into it a little bit more, we were talking about fragmentation earlier. Do you think crypto specifically is oversaturated in terms of how many asset classes there are, how many assets there are? Um, I mean, this cycle has been unique in the sense, in terms of capital flow, we've seen certain sectors catch a bid, but they were very short term, right? Meme
Mhm.
coins kind of stood the test of time for a while, but it wasn't like the last cycle where capital flow, the typical flow from Bitcoin to ETH to other alts, and then so on and so forth. What do you attribute that to, or do you have any sense of what might be causing that?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think it's a mix of things. Obviously, I have no idea, but
Right.
I think that, this is the kind of adaptability that we were talking about earlier as well. It's like, okay, well, you had this kind of capital flow that was cyclical for a few cycles, a few years, where you saw this kind of top-down approach where it would start with large caps, then mid caps, and low caps. And then the market changed like significantly. You had an influx of new type of user base, you had new asset classes come in, and then you had fragmentation where it became a lot easier to launch NFTs, launch meme coins, launch all these other things. You now have
Mhm.
utility tokens, you have governance tokens, you just have all of these different sectors coming in now. And at the same time, you have institutional capital coming in and trying to find where to put that money. And so I really think that you're just seeing the market like expanding, but not expanding or expanding at a faster rate than the capital that's coming in. And so that's where you see these kind of like different things. And maybe the capital will grow into this market and maybe it doesn't, right? And so some of these sectors die off. But I
Right.
think that's why it's changing right now is we're seeing just a massive inflow of different types of user bases and capital at the same time as new types of sectors popping up. And just like the tech barrier is being brought down to actually creating a coin, creating something with liquidity, hence pup.fun. So yeah, I think we're seeing it on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this other discussion, which is, I don't really like engage in this too much, but and I don't really agree with this, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it. Is this is the last cycle to make it in this market, and things are going to change, and Bitcoin's just going to trade like equities, and it's going to be low volatility, and people, obviously with meme coins and
Have you heard
certain
of
on chain.
Have you heard of Nvidia?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I
Right,
mean, like, yeah, sure, but like, you could say the same thing about like all these other things in the stock market,
right,
and it's like if we
right.
weren't trading Bitcoin, we'd be trading low cap equities or mid cap equity. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree, agreed. Yeah, just to wrap up like this narratives, some of the questions I had for you on narratives and
Yeah.
in crypto. Are there any narratives that you have your eye on currently? And specifically, I wanted to also ask you about perpstexes. Do you have any thoughts on what might be holding them back currently, or where that sector might go in the future?
Yeah, that's a spicy one. I have a lot of opinions on. We could spend a
Yeah,
whole hour
let's
just
hear them.
talking
Let's
about
hear
that if
them.
you want.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, man.
No,
Go ahead.
but on narratives that I'm excited for, I think that like this is one that I took on a few years ago, and I'm still massively bullish on it. I think just the Solana narrative as a whole, to the point where I even took my career and kind of joined that because I thought that was the most upside,
Right.
even outside of just trading it. So I think, in the past, the Solana narrative was that, scalability, you're going to have a lot of these other things built on top of it just because it was faster, cheaper. You could do anything that you could do on any other blockchain on top of Solana. I think that narrative has kind of evolved a little bit for me to, I think Solana is the play of this cycle and or next cycle to the point where we see a consumer application breakout on top of it. I think we're going to see some type of payment rails or some type of application that actually goes mainstream. And then at that point, I think the narrative is kind of played out. But I think that's still the one I'm most convicted and most bullish on.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more on this, and you did talk about it, but in terms of you were one of the few people that was talking about Solana, was bullish on it pretty early on. Um, how did you go about recognizing um, that shift, and what were you looking at when you decided that, hey, this is the asset that's gonna offer upside, or the
Yeah,
most
I
upside?
think I think again, like going back to those three themes of adaptability, kind of thinking outside the box, and discipline. I think this one was really thinking outside the box and adaptability. When I was on the
Right.
trading floor, I saw Serum. Um,
Hmm.
so Alameda kind of Serum, the whole on-chain order book protocol that they had built on top of
Right.
Solana. So this was when Solana was probably less than $20 the first time around. Um, and I basically was like, okay, shit, like I used Ethereum, I used Uniswap, I used all these other chains. I wrote like this massive research report on AVAX, and I was looking at Solana and this whole like on-chain order book kind of documentation. I was like, fuck, like if they can actually run an order book on a network,
Hmm.
that's a massive improvement over an AMM,
Right.
right? Like how like I could see actual spot tokens being traded on an order book. And so that's what kind of got me interested. And from there, I just started playing around with the network. And I was very much one of those people that would hop on, deposit $1,000 and just try it, just to kind of see what was going on and see what I could find by being early. And the more I got into Solana and the more stuff I did there, I saw how capable it was. I saw how good the UX was even back then compared to EVM stuff. Um, and then after kind of like the whole like exodus of like, Alameda and FTX and all of that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
you just had a lot of natural users that were still trading on Solana every single day. And so it's like, okay,
Right.
well, you have developers, you have a lot of natural users. The whole DeFi scene has been smashed to bits, but these things are still being, there's still NFTs being traded with pretty high velocity by, your random Joe with $10,000. And so I was like, fuck, like that's actually something pretty interesting. And so, yeah, I think that's when it really cemented for me. Like, okay, there is actually something here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that because I like to dig into how people like the mindset and frameworks people use because I feel like it's helpful for other people to learn from that, myself included as well, in terms of like you mentioned, thinking outside the box and being adaptable and not, just going along with because a lot of people just go on Twitter and just formulate their opinions based on what they read on there. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then
Definitely.
in terms of perp stacks, as you said, you could talk about it. You could talk about it for hours. But what's your general thought? But give me like a little. I don't know. Give me a little breakdown of what you think in terms of perp stacks, where they're headed, and what might be holding them back, and if they have a future. What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, I think perp sexes is something I was super bullish on early on when I was like, again,
Right.
like going back to the whole like on-chain order book thing, like, okay, like this
Hmm.
could be something pretty cool. I think as I've seen them kind of evolve, there's a few that have done really well. Like, I'm a big fan of HyperLiquid and like those kind of style of exchanges.
Right.
Um, but I think that like there's a lot of issues when you try to do something on chain that requires latency.
Hmm.
And especially when you have high frequency traders who are, paying for the infrastructure, whatever the case may be, it's really hard to close those inefficiencies or offer a good product that's usable for retail. I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Did you see? I think Hyperliquid has also terminal execution as well. Now, have you tried that at all, or what's your thoughts on that? If you've tried it,
Yeah, I actually haven't tried the terminal execution. I want to.
no.
I think HyperLiquid is one that's interesting to me just because it kind of is a DEX but gives you that centralized exchange experience. But
Right.
you're obviously it's at a cost, right? Where you have a centralized kind of guardian network, which isn't
Right.
necessarily a bad thing, but I think you have to understand what you're truly using. And I think that's something that a lot of people just don't understand, like how the protocols are structured. And that goes back to like read the documentation, understand what you're actually trading against, or where the edge is coming from.
Bro, I'm laughing because, people don't even understand what isolated cross is. And you're talking to them
Yeah.
about understanding how an exchange works. It's like baffles me.
Yeah.
People trading a ton of capital that don't understand what isolated cross is. So,
And like, when I'm trading on an exchange that has an order book, that's completely different to how I trade when I'm on an exchange that has a peer-to-pool model.
right.
And how my frequency is, how the fear like there's so many variables that you have to consider as a trader when you come to a new venue. Like I really don't think people give enough credit to how much your trading style should change based on the venue.
100%. 100%. All right, let's pivot a little bit. I asked the audience. I typically ask CT for questions, and usually people ask a lot. But every time I post, like I get like one or two questions, but otherwise people love to talk a lot on Twitter. But we did get one question, and let's see. The question is: Sunless Protocol asks, "Has trading changed the way you look at yourself and others? If yes, how? Do you think there is an end goal to trading?" And this is really random, but what food is what food is underrated?
Oh, all right. Has trading changed the way I look at myself and others? I would say yes, 100%. I would say like everything I do is very much like what's the trade-off in terms of like,
Yeah, yeah,
what's the upside versus like what you're kind of risking. Like,
right.
I don't like gambling unless it's for fun. Like, $100 fine, but like if I'm not sitting down at a casino table because I know my odds aren't good. Like that kind of shit. What was the second question? Sorry.
I think the second, actually, I'll add another question to this. Has it changed the way you view money? Because a lot of people have,
Yeah.
especially on CT, there's conversation. How much money do you need to retire? And 10 million is enough. 100 million isn't. All that those conversations. Has it caused some level of disillusionment when it comes to money?
Yeah, I think so. I think especially when you're like around a lot of people, like your childhood friends, let's say, I think that's when it really kind of like clicks for you. It's
Yeah.
like, fuck, like, I'm risking X amount on a daily basis, or I'm paying, five figures in margin fees, and like,
Yep.
I'm not batting an eye, but
Right.
I'm going out and people are arguing over who's paying for dinner, right? And it's like $100. And
Right.
it just like it's that kind of stuff, right? Where it's like, okay, like yeah, maybe I am a little like kind of desensitized.
Yep.
But at the same time, like I think this is like the weird balance is like I don't like talking about that kind of stuff around those kind of friends because you don't want to bring that stuff up, but like you also can't feel bad at the same time. And I think that's something that I struggled with a lot too, because it's like a lot of my friends have like normal jobs and they're making whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, well then you can't just be like feel bad just because you are doing this XYZ. So I think it's like a
Right.
balance, right?
Yeah.
Where you don't really want to talk about it because it's not reality, but like you can't just like feel bad about it and dwell on that either because you have to keep doing what you're doing and just have to kind of keep moving.
Yeah, 100%. I relate to that. I relate to that a lot. The other question was, do you think there is an end goal to trading?
Um,
That's
I mean, it's all zero sum, right? Like, let's be real.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think that was one of the interesting things for me about like why I wanted to build something and build a protocol and build my own exchange with like the NFT marketplace.
Mhm.
But I think like at the end of the day, like yeah, short term trading is very zero sum, and so I think like yeah, there's other things you can do where you're like incubating projects or advising or building kind of infrastructure. I think
Right.
that's what I kind of like to do. That gives me that kind of satisfaction. But trading itself, like scalping in and out of order books, like yeah, I don't think there's any way you can argue that it's not zero sum.
Agreed, agreed. The last, which is a completely random question. What food is underrated?
I always love good sushi, man. Like I feel like Japanese food always hits
Yeah,
hard.
sushi's yeah, absolutely, man.
I don't know if that's
Sushi's where it's
underrated,
at.
but yeah.
I don't think it's underrated, but yeah, that's where it's at. All right. Yeah, before we wrap it up, I like to ask um just some questions to get a better sense of how you manage your time, what your day looks like. So what does a typical day look like right now? I mean, you obviously don't need to get details, but is it like very structured? Because some people I talk to, their days are very structured. Others just like, hey, I get out of bed and I get out of bed and while I'm brushing my teeth, I'm at the screen. So what does that look like for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I would say like I'm probably like over obsessive and addicted in like the bad way where like, I'm
Yeah.
always checking prices, I'm always on my phone,
Yep.
like I'll wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and check on a position if I'm in something or like.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not healthy, but yeah, I would say like when I'm working, I work at Tensor full time. So when I'm working, most of my day is, taking calls and doing that kind of stuff, but I still trade, throughout the day. And then like after about like afternoonish, I'm pretty much trading full time.
Along the same lines, how do you so there by the way, I mentioned these set of interviews because I think they're phenomenal. Alpha did some interviews back in 2022.
Yeah,
And I go through
I
them
love
every
Ellen.
now and again. Yeah. And in those interviews I read yours and you mentioned the impact on your health that trading had, right? And how
Mhm.
do you manage that now and how did you go about managing that then? Like mental and, physical health. What do you do to manage that now?
Yeah, I think that's probably been one of the bigger themes in my career as well, of just like, going through different things in terms of both physical and mental. I think it's a balance, right? Like again, it's not taking every single trade, not being in a position all the time on the mental health side, limiting those big losses so you're not kind of in that fatigue state all the fucking time. And then also just like growing the fuck up. Like you don't have to be so emotional about every trade, right? Like the
Yeah.
dollar amount getting detached from that is like also something that's really important as you size up. Um, so I think that's like on the mental side. On the physical side, like I think I'm definitely feeling the effects of it now, of like sitting at a desk for 8 years,
Hmm.
sleeping on the floor
Yeah.
underneath your desk at the prop firm or running to the office at 2 in the morning. So like just trying to stay more active. And so I think something that a good friend of mine kind of said and that I've been trying to start doing is like, when you wake up in the morning is like, don't open up the charts, don't turn on your computer until you do your stretches or do your workout. It's like, do your workout, go do whatever. Just don't think about the fucking market. Cause like as soon as you turn it on, you can't turn it off. And this is like someone who's like also very fucking obsessive. So it's like, okay, that's actually a good idea. Cause like I can do that for 30 minutes in the morning. But like I have a very hard time once it's on. I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for this trade to just walk away from that. So I think that's like another thing. And then like, yeah, just like, actually leaving the desk, like traveling more. I think that's been a big theme of mine since after COVID, is not being afraid to go on vacations or just like missing trades because I'm out or like, taking a week or two off. Just because like, there's always going to be another trade. There's always going to be a market that moves. That's like, that's one thing I've learned.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm smiling while listening to this because I got into that, entire phase where I was really good about my health, and then it's like you said, I fell into before I didn't even know. Like I was trading, and I was good about my health. I was good about, you know, um, keeping segregation between, not letting trading take over my entire life.
Hmm.
Even though I do have a very obsessive personality, but at that one point I started slipping, and then I got to a point where I was the same, where I would just be at the screen all the time, right? And
Yeah.
um, it's really easy to fall into that. It's really easy to fall into that. But along the same lines, if you study people who are good at what they do, there's typically a period, whether it's athletes or traders or, in any walk of life, the one common theme is there's a period of time where they are extremely obsessed with what they're doing, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about this, but in my opinion, there needs to be that obsession to become good at what you're looking to do. And unfortunately, it comes at the there's always a trade off, right? It comes at the cost of other things. Um, but yeah, like I feel like there definitely needs to be balance at some point.
Yeah, I think that like the reason that I'm trying to be more balanced now, and the reason that I want to do a lot of what you just said is because I was very obsessive during the first like four kind of years, to the
Right.
point where I wouldn't go to class. Like when I was in college, I would just trade more than I went to class. I would I would skip dinners all the time, skip going out. I canceled my birthday dinner with my fiance. One night because I wanted to stay and trade at the office and end up losing a couple grand. And it was just like, okay, like what the fuck am I doing? Right? Like it was just like a very much like, I was in the office, 18 to 20 hours a day. And yeah, it was to the point where it's like, okay, like what are you actually doing? Why are you doing all this if you're not going to enjoy any of the money or spend any of it or kind of like get out? And then the whole mental health side as well, because then like you're there that long and you take a loss and it's okay, well, then you have nothing else to like to fall back on then, right? Because like your whole life is then behind this desk. And I think that's a dangerous kind of rabbit hole as well. It's like I know that you're trying to kind of make it and you're trying to be good, but if you have nothing else in your life, then you know it actually becomes harder.
Yeah, exactly. What good is it? And like even
Yeah.
for me, there was a phase where if I was away from my screen setup, if I had to travel, I'd have anxiety because I'm like, holy crap! Like I have
Mhm.
this screen set up, and if I'm away from it, like it just gave me anxiety. Like I'm not at my desk, So yeah, I just wanted to send that message out to every episode I do this in terms of trying to strike a balance when it comes to that. Um, and yeah, there's always a trade off when you want to get good at something, and I think at some point you need to maintain a balance. Um, but yeah,
100%.
just to wrap it up, this has been an amazing conversation, by the way. But I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Oh, all
What
good.
advice would you give to anyone listening in who's just starting off trading or has been trading for a while? Maybe three or four things that you feel are important for people to take away from this conversation.
Yeah, I think journaling is super underrated. I think that like that's something that no one really talks about now on Twitter, or just in general. But like if you can journal yourself, you can journal other trades, right? You can just journal just data that you find and just find pattern similarities. Like that's how you start creating edge from nothing. Um, I think that having a process and not just spending time aimlessly is really important because like trading is one of those things where you can spend a lot of time, but it doesn't necessarily equal outcome. Um, yeah, and I think find like-minded people. I think that's where I had the most growth myself was finding other people that I could bounce ideas. Don't be afraid to share your own ideas and systems and stuff because more times than not, they won't be able to trade it, but they'll take it and trade it in a different way, and you'll end up learning something from them. So yeah, that's something that I learned. Yeah, pretty much
Awesome.
throughout my
Awesome.
career.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And we spoke about this earlier in terms of finding information and finding people. But are there any Twitter account recommendations that you might have, or any accounts that you would nominate for an episode of Perpetual Perspectives?
Yeah, I think Magus is a good one. I know you've gotten a
Yeah,
few
man, bro, I've been
requests for
trying
him
to get him
already.
on for like a year. I actually, I've been trying to get him on for a year, but he's pretty busy. I actually talked to him recently, so hopefully I'll get him on this month.
Yeah, Magus is a good friend of mine and started trading around a similar time. So yeah.
All right, we'll definitely get Magus on. And is there anything else that you'd like to plug or any concluding remarks?
No, I think that's it, man. I appreciate you having me on. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me, and we'd love to have you on in the future. We can dig into a lot of things, and
Yeah, for sure.
typically I like to end these conversations on like a thought provoking, something thought provoking or a quote. And we were talking about struggle and going through suffering, and there's two quotes that come to mind. One is from Bukowski, and it goes, "What matters most is how well you walk through the fire," and the other one is Dostoevsky, which is, "There's only one thing that I dread not to be worthy of my sufferings." So, on that note, to everyone listening in, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and were able to take away some actionable items or things that you can consider to improve upon. And until next time, thank you.